Welcome, Tania, to the Conquering Everest podcast. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on, and I'm glad our paths crossed because you've got a pretty good little story that I think is a valuable one to share with everyone. So we'll get into all that goodness here in just a moment. But as we get started, if you don't mind, just maybe take a few moments and introduce yourself to our audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, pardon me, sorry, my dog just walked in.
That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Tania Danielle. I am an emotional eating therapist, and I help people who emotionally eat and who binge eat.
And and I know your story's got a little more to it than just eating, but let's start with how did you get into this line of work?
So I got into this line of work through my own challenges. I myself I really don't like labels, but I had binge eating disorder. So I've always struggled with food all my life. As many people can, resonate with this. I'd always been on a diet, right from being a young child, actually. Dieting with my mum. I was always very body conscious, always never happy with my body, and I always tend to food, always tend to food. Some people turn against it, some people turn to it, and I always tend to food. And then after I got into fitness at one point in my life, and I competed. So I was very, very much, I was very all or nothing. I was very, I'm full speed ahead, or I'm not doing, I'm very all or nothing. I was very all or nothing. And I got into fitness, and me being my all or nothing characteristic, I then decided to compete in the bikini category, so like in bikini bodybuilding. And as you'll probably know, or can imagine, that the food is very, very strict, and the eating is very strict. And not only does it it's a really, really, really strict, hard process, really hard. And people don't underestimate how tough it is mentally and physically. And then after this process, wow, the aftermath was just incredible. And my body just responded to food. It just responded to food. And I think my body was using food as a coping strategy. It was using food to probably deal with a lot of things that had been buried deep. Yeah.
So you weren't, when you were competing and bodybuilding, you were you binge eating at that time, or were you pretty disciplined?
So what happened was, the first time, what happened when you do bodybuilding, I don't know if it's the same in America, but we have like the qualifier. So we have the qualifying event, and then we go through to the final. And what happened was I went through and got placed in the qualifier. So I got placed. I then got placed in the final, so the British final. And what happens is there's generally a gap between the date, obviously, of the qualifying event. So say, for example, September, and then the final, say, could be in, I don't know, October, November. So there's a gap in between both. Now, I'll always remember my coach saying to me on my qualifier, now just go eat whatever you want. And I was almost like, oh my God, really? Oh my God, really? And I was just like a caged animal. Literally, I was like a caged animal. It was like I'd never seen food before. I'd never had sugar before. I'd never had cakes before. And bear in mind, this was a long time coming anyway. So I already had a really poor relationship with myself and food. So then when he said this to me, it was almost like my permission slip to go, right, okay, that is it. I can just eat everything. And from the qualifier to the final, obviously, I was just binging in between. I kept trying to go back on my prep and my diet, and I was just in this cycle. And I was in that cycle straight away. So by the time I got to the final, I was already in it. I was already quite deep in it.
What does binge eating look like for those of us that aren't real familiar with that term?
Yeah. I get that. So I suppose there's different, I don't want to say different severities, but there's different. So when we turn to food, there is probably different, stages and levels of how we can eat. So when we look at like emotional eating, so, some emotional eating is absolutely normal. Some of it's, comfort eating, and it can be normal. So it can be normal. And then when does that start to become a problem? So it starts to become a problem when the emotions that we felt before we ate are 10 times or, a lot worse after we finished eating. So that's when it starts to become a problem. And it also starts to become a problem when we binge eat. And like you said, what does binge eating look like? Now, binge eating can look like eating thousands and thousands of calories, generally in quite a short space of time. So it's generally in between like 1 or 2 hours. And it's eating at such speed and intensity that people can even class it as they're going like like a dream state, or like they kind of zone out. They can go in like a state, like a frenzy. And binge eating is eating at speed, intensity, and like zoning out. And then also after you binge ate, you generally get overwhelming feelings of guilt, shame, self-loathing, disgust, and really intense feelings.
Is there periods of not eating that follows that? So like if you have a night where you binge, or a day that you binge, and then those emotions kick in, do you then try to overcompensate the other direction and then force yourself not to eat for a period of time?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
So again, and I'm not saying all the time, but I really want to say most of the time. So generally what happens is when somebody has either binge it or they have, binged or whatever you want to call it the night before, because it generally happens on a night or late afternoon or early evening. On an evening, it generally happens on an evening. And then what tends to happen is the next day you're like, right, that's it. I'm going to be good. I'm really good. I'm not going to have any food for a while. I feel bloated. I feel sick. I feel disgusted. I need to get them calories out of me. And you get kind of obsessed. I've got to get these calories out of me, what I've eaten the night before. And it's a really like obsessive cycle that you then been in, because then you then restrict yourself from eating food because you've eaten way too much the night before. You want to get these calories out of your body. And what happened with me is so with bulimia, there's different forms. Obviously, you can make yourself sick, and then you can also take laxatives. So it's getting it out of your body. And what I used to do is I used to drink lots and lots and lots of laxatives, because for me, I wanted it out of my body quick. I wanted it out of my body. And I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with getting the food out of my body. So yes, you then go on this restriction. I can't eat. I need to like correct what I've done, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think I've had moments of that, especially as I think back to high school when I wrestled. I was always a bigger kid. I've always been a bigger guy, but when you wrestle, you have to make a certain weight. You have to be at a certain weight in order to have your match. So I would always be over, and then I would spend an hour running around, a hot sauna in a sweatsuit just to try to lose the water weight to get down to weight to wrestle. And it was kind of like that. I can remember that a little bit during those days where I would eat, feel really guilty and ashamed, and then basically just either over exercise or cut out the eating. It only seemed to happen to me while I was wrestling, but yeah. So I mean, I could totally kind of relate to that on some levels. Now, when did the binge eating start for you? What were you? Was it before you started competing in bikini modeling, or?
So I would say that I had binged eat before. I definitely binge ate before, but the intensity and like I said, the speed, because you can obviously it also as well with binge eating, how you can again how it can happen is it can obviously, the more frequent it happens as well. So prior to me competing, I would, like I said, I'd always been, I had an issue with food and it was very all or nothing. So I definitely binged before, but the intensity just got so much worse after I'd competed. And the restriction of the diets, but I dieted all my life. So there'd always been elements of binging, always. But it just got progressively worse.
And with the binging, I know you had some substance abuse issues in your past as well. Was that prior to the binge eating? Was that during?
No, yeah. So the substance abuse, God, I started taking drugs when I was really young. Well, I was quite young. So I was like, probably 13, 14, something like that. I can't exactly remember the exact age, but I was around 13, 14, so I was quite young. And again, the characteristics, I mean, some of the people I work with and some of the people are, in my group and things like that, some people have, again, had substance abuse. So it's like, I know that when I was, for a long time, I was trying to bury my head. I didn't like who I was. The substance, the drugs, the alcohol kind of like was an escapism, I suppose. It was kind of taking me away from me, if that makes sense. I never wanted to be me. It was always like I wanted to change who I was. And I was never, ever, I always felt like I didn't belong, or, I didn't quite fit in, or, I just always felt like a bit of an outcast. And I think that insecurity and that, I suppose, self-doubt and being insecure and feeling not very confident in myself kind of led me to the drugs and the alcohol. But that happened before. So my kind of drugs and alcohol life was kind of my early stages of my life, I'd say. And then the binge eating and the fitness was after that. So I kind of switched one addiction for another, if that makes sense.
And what do you think, as you look back, even prior to when you started partaking with drugs and alcohol? I mean, was there any one moment in your life or a series of moments in your life as a young child that you've identified as causing you not to feel comfortable in your own skin, or not liking who you become?
Honestly, I mean, my mum and dad are both great. I do think that every child is different, and I do think that every experience and every memory and can be taken very differently by different children. And I think that even a criticism that's a joke that's maybe taken as a criticism, or a parent who wants the best for them, but unfortunately it comes across quite critical. All those things can affect the way we see ourselves. Like you've heard on the TV, you hear something enough, you start to believe it. And even if somebody's got the best intention for you, but that child is either taking it as a criticism, or they're not feeling good enough, or they're not good enough as they are, who they are. I think all these different memories and experiences with loved ones can impact how we feel about ourselves. And this is completely on an unconscious level.
Right.
So this is completely unconscious to anybody. Nobody's going to purposely do that to a child. Especially if you're in a loving family, they don't intentionally do that. But I do think that everybody, especially children, they take things very, very. One child can be absolutely fine with one comment, and another child can be devastated.
Right.
And it's how it impacts our body, I think.
So you would say that your childhood was pretty, for the most part, you felt it was a loving environment, just maybe a little critical at times with your perception, but I mean the love and the what's the word I'm looking for, the acceptance from your parents and grandparents and all that was all attached or attached for you, but for whatever reason emotionally you would take some interpretations maybe as criticisms or.
Yeah, I mean, I do, honestly, I do. I mean, I absolutely love my mum and my dad. I love them both very, very much. But my mum always wanted the best for me, and she always wanted me to be who she wanted me to be, her idea of perfect. And unfortunately, sometimes that could come across quite critical. It could come across quite critical. But I do think that every parent does that to some degree.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's an important point to bring up, because some people grow up in really dysfunctional, toxic environments, and then you could look back at their childhood and say, oh well, okay, dad was a substance abuser, oh mom was an absentee parent, or whatever the case may be, and you can say, I could see there's the lack of love, guidance, teaching, that wasn't. So for me, and for instance, in my teenage years, I started seeking validation from others, which led to drugs, criminal activities, whatever the case may be. But that's not always the case for everyone who may battle an addiction, whether it be substance abuse or food or pornography, whatever the case may be. It is very much possible that you can grow up in a loving family and still experience these addictions in your life.
Absolutely. But I also do believe that regardless of, I was brought up in a very loving, I was in a very good environment, but I do believe that whatever our parents are going through, so especially when we're in the womb, and this might be going a little bit woo-woo, but I do believe that whatever our parents or our mum's going through when we are in the womb, that can get transferred to the baby. So if, for example, if the parent or the mother has a lot of stress and anxiety, yeah, it could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be, all these abuse, it could be all these different things. But stress and anxiety still respond in the same way. And to that baby, they will feel all of that. So when the baby comes out, obviously, it's already feeling stressed and anxious. It's already feeling those feelings of, what it's like to feel stressed, what it's like to feel anxious. And then the baby gets held by the mother, and guess what? She feels anxious again. So it just transmits that anxiety and that feeling of anxious to the baby. And I do believe that's.
Yeah, that's a great concept that I had not really thought about in the past. But yeah, it would make sense. I mean, we are all balls of energy, right? And that energy could be all over the spectrum. So it would make a lot of sense to think if your parent was going through some struggles, or your mother more specifically was going through some struggles while carrying a baby, makes sense that baby is going to
Would feel
feel
it.
that
Yeah.
internally. But
Yeah.
let's talk about food as an addiction for a little bit, because there's a lot of different eating disorders. I know at least in the United States, we have a real, for many years now, I've had a pretty severe obesity rate. Everything has gotten bigger, and because I was thinking about this actually not too long ago, where there was a day that you would, maybe you would go out to eat. Let's just pick on McDonald's because they're one of the biggest and most popular. But you would go there and get a meal, and it would be maybe a reasonable sized meal, and you'd get like maybe a small beverage, soda. But now you go and it's like they're throwing really bad food at you at a very cheap price, like they've got their dollar menu, and it's like, oh, and by the way, you can get a 32-ounce soda for $1 as well. So everything is like getting bigger and bigger, so the consumption is more and more. And I mean, if you already suffer from, like, I've been a big eater most of my life, and so I have to be very intentional about that. But with food addiction in the line of work that you're in, what do you see? Are there any trends? Are there um, any certain criterias that you see in the people that you help coach?
Yeah, quite. There really, really, really is, and I hear quite a lot as well about people saying, "How can I distract from food? How can I distract from food?" I mean, we'll get to the criteria, the characteristics in a minute, but when you were saying about, like, obviously people eating quite a lot and people being big eaters, and then people ask me, how can I distract from food? And honestly, the thing is, food is the distraction. Food is the distraction. It's the distraction from a lot of different things. It's a distraction from how we are truly feeling. So food, if you think about food, it gives us that momentary, it gives that good feeling momentarily, and it releases like dopamine in the brain. So it releases like that reward chemical. It gives us that good feeling. So we are turning to food generally because we are trying to distract from how we really feel. Now, the characteristics that I can see in people, generally they can be, quite highly stressed, very anxious, highly anxious. I read a study the other day, and it was saying, I think it was what, 80% of people who have binge eating disorder generally have anxiety as well, so anxiety disorder. So quite often anxiety is very high. It's very common, and like I said, quite often as well, people have had substance abuse. Not always, but some people have had substance abuse as well, and the food tends to come after it. So it's like you have similar to me, have the substance abuse, then I swap the substance abuse for fitness obsession, and then once obviously the competition and everything finished, it all came out in food. So it was like everything that had been buried deep from, the substance abuse. I was physically abused. I had my arm broke. I had my cheekbones, I had my face smashed in. There was a lot that went on during that time. So everything that I was burying deep came out in food, because I wasn't taking drugs. I wasn't taking alcohol. I wasn't turning to anything else. I was having to be me. I was having to face me, and having to face my deepest, darkest parts of me. And that's when it came out in food.
You talked a little bit there about physical abuse. Was this, and it sounds like this occurred in your adult years. Was this, just an abusive relationship, or was it along those lines of where the abuse occurred?
So, unfortunately, when you generally are in the drugs and alcohol lifestyle, what tends to happen is obviously, you mix with people who are also in that lifestyle. And
Yeah.
you're chasing whatever you're chasing the drugs, you're chasing the alcohol, you're chasing, you're mixing with these people that obviously who are in the same situation. Now everybody's dealing with their own things, everybody's dealing with their own demons, and unfortunately, what can happen is, I was in several relationships, some very psychologically abusive, but then also there was very, very physical as well. And I just think that, and I also do believe, is how you feel about yourself, that's what you attract. So my self-worth was really, really low. I didn't like myself, like I said to you, even as a teenager, even as a young child, I didn't like myself. So when I was already in the thick of the drugs, the alcohol, I was chasing this. My self-worth was probably at an all-time low. And, I was attracting people who didn't value me. I was attracting people who didn't think I was worth anything. It is that mirror image of how you feel about yourself you're going to attract.
Yeah, and that self-worth is, I think at the root of a lot of the bad things that we experience in our life, whether it be addiction, depression, illness, a lot of it that in my experience starts, you can trace it back to a point in time where your image of yourself, something caused that image to shift into a different direction, because we're not born like that. We're born just curious and loving life in the world and wanting to explore everything. And then somewhere along the lines, our mindset gets warped or skewed. So self-love is I know I suffered from it. It took me 40 some odd years to figure out that was the problem, a lot of the problem behind what I was dealing with. What's that?
It took me a while too.
Yeah, I think it takes us all a while. Because when you're talking about being, in this instance, talking about like food addiction, it's so easy to turn to food because, like you said, it gives you that momentary pop of dopamine, so you feel really good, but then you feel terrible about it afterwards because you're like, I shouldn't have ate that. I know better than that. Let's talk about self-worth a little bit. So when you work with somebody, where do you start? What is like the starting point for recovery?
So firstly, can I just say a minute ago to your last thing, what you were just saying?
Sure. Yeah.
What I also want to say to you as well is, like you were saying, like when we're saying about food, the thing with food is we can't live without it. That is the thing that is the difference between any other type of addiction. We cannot live without it. So it's not like drugs, it's not like alcohol, it's not like whatever these other things are, gambling. Food we cannot live without, and this is why it's so difficult, and this is why it's like taunting. It's really like, it feels like it's taunts us. It's like, oh my God. And sorry, what did you say? So where do I start with someone?
So somebody comes to you for help to kind of get their diets, their health under control, and if it is a situation where there's that self-love element, how do you approach that with someone who doesn't? Here you got somebody that really is overly critical about themselves and not forgiving themselves for the mistakes they made. For you, where do you start with someone?
So for me, nearly everybody comes to me like that. Everybody comes to me like that. My programs are not about dieting. So when people come to me about, they can come to me, but I make it very clear, my programs are not about weight loss. My programs are getting a healthy relationship with themselves and food. So what will happen naturally is when they stop binging and they stop emotionally eating, then what will happen is their body should find the right baseline or where they should be at naturally. So when they stop turning to food and they stop binging, that's when they should naturally settle to the right where they should be. So that's, and then when somebody has very, most people, like I said, most people feel like that. Most people who are emotionally eating or binging, they feel that way. So we start really, really gentle. We allow them to get, the things in their thought out, because a lot of people keep these things in the thought processes. We do some really deep therapies. So I do some really deep therapies with them that allows them to change their beliefs about how they feel about themselves. Because, like you said, quite often there is an event. There's either an event when we're very young. There's either a memory, something we've heard, something we've seen, or something that's impacted how we feel about ourselves. And generally what happens is that really young memory or event, whatever's happened, can then tailor, and that pattern and that belief will continue through the rest of our life, right? So if, for example, I'll give you an example. If when you was very, very young, somebody left you, and this is just an example, somebody left you, say, for example, your father left you, that could create a trauma inside that child's body. Everybody leaves me. So that belief is there. Everybody leaves me, everybody leaves me. And then what generally might happen, not all the time, but quite often, throughout their life, they'll see a pattern of people leaving them. So I work with going back to those memories, going really deep into the subconscious and changing how that belief affects them. So we can't change the memory, but we can certainly change how they see that memory, and how that, because it gets stuck within the system. So I really work with unsticking them beliefs and changing how they feel about themselves. And it's a really gradual process. So it's a real gradual process. Bear in mind that people have felt like that about themselves for years. So it's I work real gradual, step by step, really gently with people, with their conscious behaviours, with their subconscious beliefs and values. And then I guide them to food freedom, which is similar to like intuitive eating, but we do it really gently. And I also get people to work on things that they can do themselves to help themselves along this process as well, to help themselves.
Do you have an opinion on fad diets, diet pills? I'm thinking I know the answer, but do you have an opinion on, like keto and Atkins or whatever the new flavor of the month is?
Yeah, don't do them. Do not do them.
Yeah.
That's it.
And the diet
Honestly,
pills, leave them alone too. The diet pills, you leave those alone too.
Nothing. Do not do anything, because ultimately, and again, I don't really want to go down that diet industry, but ultimately, we don't need any of these things. We just need to be in tune with ourselves, what our body needs, and obviously how we respond to food. So the thing that we need to work on is not the food. It's not the food itself. And people really kind of blame the food. They think food is the enemy. Food is not the enemy. It's how we are responding to the food. So that's what we need to work on. We need to work on what is going on inside of us that's making us respond. Because you've got to think about it right in this way. It's just our mind and our body choosing food as a coping strategy. That's all it is. Yeah. Our mind and body has just said, right, okay, that's my coping strategy for whatever I'm dealing with. Food is the thing that I've chosen, instead of either drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, whatever it wants to choose. So the diets and the pills will not help. Will not help.
And I would imagine they would probably almost make you feel worse in the long run, because here you struggle through a diet, or you spend all this money on pills, and maybe you see a little bit of weight loss, but then ultimately there's going to come a day where you're going to be off of that diet, or you're going to stop buying those pills, and that emotional attachment is still there. So you're going to ultimately end up gaining the weight back and probably feeling worse than what you did before.
Yeah. And like you said, so like, and what tends to happen is, yes, we can lose a little bit at the very beginning, right? But then what happens, like you said, what happens when we come off the diet or the pills is we tend to put the weight back on and more. And then we think, right, okay, I'm going to go on a diet. So bear in mind, we've started off here. I'm going to use my hand, started off here. We lose a little bit, then put a little bit back on. And then what happens again is we lose a little bit, put a little bit back on. Lose a little bit, put a little bit back on. So by the time we're here, we actually wished we was at this weight when we started. And it's
Right.
like, you know, what was all that self-sabotaging for? You know, yeah, we just, when we look, most people who I work with especially, if I said to them and look back at how they was physically, because a lot of people focus on physical appearance, look at how they was physically when they first started a diet, would they like to be back there now? And everybody says, oh my goodness me, yes. When I look back, I was super slim, or oh my God, I looked hot, or oh my God, you know, like there was nothing wrong with me. Most people say that.
Let's talk a little bit about your coaching, your website, books, what resources do you have out there if someone is hearing this and they're interested in either learning more about you or even working with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have my website, which is called beatthebinge.com. So beat slash the binge. Sorry, that went a bit wrong. But beat the binge. So I think you've got a link anyway, haven't you?
Yep, I'll leave a link
yeah.
down below. Yeah.
So I do private one-to-one coaching. So I do private one-to-one coaching. That can be either 4-month or a 6-month coaching period. I also have a membership which I've just recently launched. To be fair, so it's a really great place for someone to start if they're a little bit nervous. But again, it depends on what they want, because with the membership, it's self-study, so you have to be dedicated yourself to do it. And 9 times out of 10, what will happen is you'll have that, you know, little voice in your head that will say to you, no, this is wrong. I need to go back on my diet.
Yeah.
So, but the membership is fantastic. That's a 12-month membership. It's a low ticket. You do get support from me, obviously, as well. So you just don't get the subconscious therapies.
Okay.
Therapy.
And your one-on-one coaching, I'm imagining it's fully remote as well. I mean, anybody from anywhere in the world could work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with most people, South America, work with people all different parts of the world. And with my one-to-one coaching, which I tend to do, and I don't know how many others offer this, is I offer intense support as well. So people get daily support, as well as the deep therapies, they get daily support. And the reason I do that is because I know in my own recovery, I saw somebody once every 2 weeks, and I just needed that support in between those times, in between those appointments. And I know how it feels. So I really wanted to support people fully and to the best of my ability as well.
And then how about social media? Are you on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, any of those?
So I have a Facebook group called How to Stop Emotionally Eating. So I have a group. I have a Facebook page, business page called Beat the Binge, but I think, again, you probably find me under Tania Danielle, maybe, Beat the Binge. And my Insta is Beat the Binge as well.
All right. Well, very good. Well, and I'll make sure I have all those links available for anybody that's either watching the stream or listening to the podcast. Those links will be available. But I really do appreciate you coming on the show. This is a topic where, you know, when I heard or read of your story, you know, it hit kind of home with me because, you know, food is a comfort for me. I guess I don't really subscribe to the to the diets, and I don't really binge eat, but I overeat. So I was like, this is something that I don't think gets enough attention or really is talked about enough, because over the years I can't think of too many times where, other than a doctor telling me to go on a diet, there's not a whole lot of education out there about eating, unless you just happen to get in with the right person or the right group, and you really have that support. Yeah, but
Yeah.
thank you for coming on the show. And I always finish these conversations with one last question, and 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 that is, I'm I'm going to go on a limb and say somebody's either watching this stream or they're listening to this podcast, and this episode is really resonating with them. They've got an unhealthy relationship with food, or maybe they even have an unhealthy relationship with drugs or alcohol, but they're struggling right now, and they just really need to hear a word of inspiration. So, as we close out today's conversation, what would you offer to that person that's listening right now? What would be your final, well, I hate to say word, parting words, because this could be the start of a whole new relationship, anyways. But what
Yeah.
would you leave them with for this episode?
Oh, do you know what? Honestly, this is such a great question. So for me, I just want everybody to know that what they are going through right now, so their biggest challenges that they are going through could actually be their biggest blessing. And I know people will be going, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? They're really struggling and they're really battling right now. But I can honestly tell you my biggest battles have been my absolute blessings. They have made me who I am today. They have, brought me to my business. They've brought me to helping people. I want to kind of get it out to the world that, like, whatever you come from, whatever background you come from, whatever drugs, alcohol, like you said, porn, whatever you are doing, do not let that, do not doubt yourself, because it could be the making of you. It absolutely could be the making of you. You can help other people who are also going through what you're going through right now. So you never know where this is going to lead you. Even though it's hard right now, you never know where this is going to lead you. You really don't.
And those are great words, and there's so much truth to that, because yeah, so many great things have come out of seasons of darkness and struggles. So
Yeah.
once again, I appreciate you being on the show. Hang tight. We're gonna have a little chat off the air, but thanks again, and everybody that's watching or listening, make sure you check out those links. If any of this has resonated with you today, I will have them all available, and otherwise you can reach out to me and I can get you in contact. So I guess with that, I'm going to say hang tight, but we'll talk again. But bye for now.
Thank you for having me. Bye for now.
Yeah.